Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of On the 50. Today, I have a very special guest, Mike Leitzke. Mike is a very well-known DCI, WGI, and BOA judge specializing in percussion. I've gotten to know Mike pretty well over the last few years through various critiques and working through some of his local circuits. Mike is an up-and-coming star in the judging community, and if you ask me, is one of the best out there. Today we talk about his process, becoming a judge, and how he hones his skills, how he prepares, and just how he kind of gets better as a judge. This is a difficult job. Sometimes I sound critical of judges on this podcast, but I too am a judge. I judge locally and nationally, and I love it, and I think it's a really intriguing area, and I like to talk about it because I think it's something that is swept under the rug and just happens, and I think people need to get more informed. This podcast is very awesome if you are interested in either becoming a judge or you just want more insight into it. We also talked to Mike about his experience with the Nashville tornado. He lost his house, and just his overall positive mindset towards that disaster and just life in general. I think Mike is a super nice guy, super cool. He is also a fellow alumni of Rhythm X, and he's an alumni of Carolina Crown where I teach, so we have a lot in common that way, and I just respect the dude a lot. He's awesome, very smart, a very well-prepared person. I think he sets a very high bar for how a judge should operate. So I enjoyed it, as will you. To talk about your relationship and your role as a judge, that's obviously how we met. I don't know when that began because I was teaching the Crossmen while you were judging, and obviously with Crown. But one thing that I think you have set a very high bar for, and from my perspective, everything I speak on, especially on this podcast, is from a very subjective place. And I don't speak for really anyone but myself or really the organizations that I work for. But something that I think you have set the highest bar on is preparation. And I had not ever seen a judge prepare themselves the way that you had in terms of routing, in terms of making sure you were researching the music that was being played, the vocabulary, the idiom. How did you grow yourself into that person who is you must be one of the 2 or 3 youngest judges in the activity, and you seem to be the number 1 most prepared judge, at least with DCI, because I think judging WGI is a little bit different. You get to sit, you get to just read it, and I think that is like an amazing luxury. It's a different challenge, and we can talk about that. In terms of DCI, being on the ground, how did you evolve yourself into the place where you got a process? Do you have a process preparing to judge these groups?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it was born from, when I was a member, I was in the front ensemble. So the first time I was actually like on the field from sideline to sideline at a drum corps show was the first show I judged. Mm-hmm. So I was really nervous about that. I just didn't know what that was going to feel like, or, what it, and from talking to people that had judged before I had, they're just like, once you get out there, it's fine. You're going to know what to do. You're going to have that instinct. But those were all people that were snare drummers or tenor drummers, and they had that experience of being out there. Well, I didn't. So I felt like I needed to overly prepare and know exactly where I needed to be to make sure that the students were safe and that I was safe, because that's the worst thing that could ever happen is like you make yourself a part of the performance because you're not in the right place, or even worse, you put someone or yourself in danger.
Right.
So that's like where it really came out of, was that I developed a process because of that. But then, if you recall, the 2016 and I think the 2017 season, they really limited field judges in the number of shows that featured field judges.
Yep. Yeah.
So it was like regionals only and championships. So going into 2016, I think I did the Atlanta regional that year, And I knew that if I were to go into championships, because you don't really know until the end of the season.
Right.
If I were to go into championships, this is going to be the one read that I get on this group beforehand. So it was really, really important, not only for me to make sure that, I knew how to navigate the show. Obviously, there would be a bunch of changes and stuff like that, but just to get out there and, get up. That was really important for me personally, but also for the groups. So that way they kind of knew a little bit of what to expect. Because I'm sure, for you teaching a group those years, you got to those regional shows and it's like, all right, we've been kind of in this zone all year long. Now we're going to totally flip the script and it's going to be judged differently. Now there was P2 still in those years.
Right.
So it was a little that was still there. So there was balance between micro and macro level. But still, you just didn't really know what to expect. So I think after, San Antonio, then Atlanta, then Allentown, and any other shows where they may have had the field judge sprinkled in, you guys had a little bit of an expectation of what was going to happen. The performers were used to having, someone in a wacky green shirt running around in front of them, yelling in the recorder. Because those are all visceral experiences that until you do it, it takes you out of the element because it's different than rehearsal. Mm-hmm. It's different than the performance that you have when you don't have that person right up in your grill. So for me, it was a survival thing. Then it became I have to make this first read perfect for these groups because that's all they're going to get. And then I've just kind of carried that mentality over. Like once you start to learn how to prepare like that, you have a process in place. I don't know. I have a hard time like deviating from that or not doing that. And it's different, obviously, now that we only have the front sideline and a few steps out there. Definitely a little bit of a different preparation. It's more so like learning what's going to be on the sideline so you can not step on things and stuff like that.
Right, and I think something that you spoke on, which is really important, and it's something that I think about in my own judging, though I tend to judge effect visual, so it doesn't really matter as much, but there's a lot of talk about judges, because every judge has a background. We go into these situations where as an instructor, as a designer, you kind of expect or you want the judge to get it all. But the truth is, like, you were a member of the front ensemble at Crown and Rhythm X. Well, Jeff Brooks was a snare drummer, right? Jeff Prospery is a fife and drum snare drummer, and obviously he has his experiences in DCI too, but he's more battery centric, right? Someone like Omar Carmenades, he is a little bit of a mixed bag. He obviously arranges for both, a little bit more well known in the front ensemble world. But that all being said, everyone has a different background. Julie Davila, more front ensemble oriented now, but also was a battery member. So everyone has a different path. That's all I'm trying to say. And everyone has a different background. So for you as someone who was a keyboard player, now you're going into a world where you're evaluating the best drum lines in the world, arguably ever. If you ask me, I think there's an argument to be made that the drum lines coming out now are better than ever and are doing more. So aside from that sort of case-by-case preparation, what did you do to make yourself equipped to judge Santa Clara Vanguard, Blue Devils, Crown, Bluecoats, Cadets, Cavaliers? Like, what did that process look like? How did you go like day one? Okay, I'm going to familiarize myself with the drumline world more.
Yeah, I mean, it's just watching a lot videos. It was learning the vocabulary, playing through it, looking and transcribing music. And I had always kind of done that. Like if there was, a particular lick that I thought was cool. Like I remember there was a snare break in the 2007 Phantom Regiment show that had some 9-lit puttitas into some shots or something like that. I can't remember it right off the top of my head now. But that was something that, I mean, I remember being, 19 years old and just like watching this video and like wanting to figure that out. And, I played snare drum in high school, but like I was never going to be, a top level drum corps snare drummer. Like that just wasn't my thing.
Right.
I was really enjoyed playing keyboards and was fortunate to, kind of have that avenue. But it was a lot of just, transcribing things, learning the vocabulary, And I mean, honestly, like it's something that, continues. I feel like if you're going to be an adjudicator, or, even if you want to be a great teacher in these activities, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to continually evolve your knowledge set and, figure out what's going on, because if you don't, the activity is going to pass you by. I mean, there's so many incredible, innovative designers out there that, they're looking at contemporary dance programs. They're looking at these other areas of pageantry, figuring out how they can take that and apply it to what we do. And unless you are taking that same mentality of, okay, these groups are using line array sound systems now, what does that mean? What's the difference between a dynamic and a condenser mic? How can that affect the sound that we have coming out of the speakers? How does the placement of those mics, and understanding all of those variables and continually learning, I think are what allows people to be successful in this activity, because they're continually innovating and evolving themselves. And as a judge, if you don't stay up with that, there's going to be someone else that does, and they're going to be able to respond more appropriately to what the groups do. So, that's one thing that, we talked about the other things that I've been doing during quarantine so far, but, I've got my pad and my sticks right here, and I have been playing probably more than I ever have, just because I have time to do it. And, it's been a lot of like watching the learn the book videos that, groups have put out the past couple of years, where it's just, like even learning like how some people notate things is like different than what I thought. Like looking at, if we want to talk specifically about Crown last year, that beginning portion of the show where it's like, I had in my mind kind of what that looked like on paper.
Right. And
looking at the actual transcription of it, like it's totally different than what I would have thought.
Right.
So it's just really neat to learn, how Tom and Travis write things out, and, how that, compares to what my thought process was.
That's super interesting, and I think the idea that you're watching the Learn the Beats videos it's very well. I guess I feel like my perspective on what you do is somewhat validated, and I think this is not necessarily the norm. And I know that there are judges out there who might feel like, I've been in activity for 40 years, I've seen it all, I don't need to kind of integrate myself into this sort of moving, evolving organism. And there are still judges at the top level who wouldn't do that, who don't do that. I don't think that this process is necessarily one that everyone undergoes, even though I think it's really important. And I do want to hear about some of the ways that WGI and DCI sort of train the upkeep. But one thing that I have talked about in this podcast, and I think is an interesting idea, is trying to create some kind of consultancy or internship program where we're taking judges every 2-3 years and they're consulting, or they're, interning sounds a little bit weird, like unpaid internship. That's like a not a nice term. So I think consultant is a better thing, but there are judges out there who have not picked up sticks like you just demonstrated, who have not played drum set, or have not taught a high school how to clean a triplet roll in 20, 30 years, like even on modern equipment. And those are people evaluating independent world groups at finals for WGI. And I think one way to upkeep, because I don't think everyone has the approach you have, I think one way to upkeep it is to integrate some people as consultants into the very beginning. Day one design, we're constructing the show all the way through the end, and that you have to sort of enter into that program so that it's not just, and I don't know, I'm interested to hear from you, like, I'm going to the Museum of Modern Art and looking at paintings. I'm watching the Nutcracker Ballet. I'm watching contemporary dance. I'm watching these films like Quentin Tarantino, or these directors who have incredible cinematography. That's all good and well, but like I think people need to be engaging with like how this is happening, like in our medium, not just like I'm gonna expand myself artistically as a portion of my upkeep as a judge, but rather how are modern shows being designed, how are modern shows being composed. Then when you go back as a judge, you're like, it's exactly what Mike McIntosh did for himself. He was an incredible judge. Like he's one of the best WGI judges. I love his tapes. Awesome
Absolutely.
Dude. But then he goes, I'm gonna go design a gateway for 5 years. I'm gonna force myself to do this thing that's different. then I'm going to go back to judging. And the fact that that's not compulsory for every judge, I think there's a way we can do that. So, rant over, but I don't know how much you can tell us about like what these top circuits do to ensure that you are maintaining your perspective on the contemporary activity.
Yeah, so we have specific training sessions that we do for both WGI and for DCI, and we focus, there's kind of holistic things that are between all of the judges, and then we have smaller breakout sessions for, your own individual captions. Yeah. So for DCI, it's generally broken down into music and visual, and then you have kind of effect breakdowns from there, and then, more micro level focus on, for percussion people, this is some things that are happening this year. And Lee Carlson, I think, does a really, really good job as artistic director, or I think his title may have changed. I don't know what it is off the top of my head right now, but he does a great job of kind of being the conduit between the judges and the ensembles to know what the ensembles are working on, so that way we can be prepared for that and know how to speak to what they're doing. So I think he's done a really, really excellent job. Michael Cesario was in that role before Lee, and Michael did a similarly great job of communicating those ideas, just to make sure that no one is caught not knowing what's happening out there, or it gets caught in an unexpected way. WGI I have a little bit less experience with, and obviously the season was a little bit weird, but we do before the season starts, we get together and just kind of have a meeting as a total panel, and then similarly to DCI, we have breakouts from there, and these are almost like 8-hour sessions where we're watching videos, we're talking about things. You have input from designers and top level instructors, and we really hash out a lot of the philosophy for the year in those conversations. And it's really, really interesting to hear the perspective, from Scott Johnson, Tom Rarick, Lee Bettis, Omar, like these people that are just, giants in the activity, and they have been for so long. And just for me as like a new guy to just like sit there and like soak all of that in, and then when they got to the point where they like called on me, it's like, well, what do you need my perspective for? Like these guys are these guys are where it's at. So there's a lot of training that happens with that. Then we had a call every single Monday night where we would talk about things that we saw either at WGI shows or at local circuit shows that were pushing the bounds of the activity, or things that we hadn't seen, or just anything of note. And all of that talk was not specific around any particular group. Like the one rule that we had is if you saw something that you wanted to talk about there that was innovative, you talked about what you saw. You didn't talk about the group's name. So
right. That
way it remained anonymous, and no one came into a show with any sort of preconceived notions about what they were going to see. And that's something that I think is really, really important, because every single time you judge a show, regardless of the activity that you're in, it's the show of the night. A group could have been first place last night, but if they don't bring it at this show and someone else does, it would be wrong to not reward the group that really brought it. So, that's a lot of the training that we do. There's a lot of mentorship that happens, sending tapes around to, more senior level people that have been there for longer than you have, and people that you respect. And, it always cracks me up when, I'll feel like, man, I really had a great recording here. I gave them great information. I was where I needed to be for DCI, or if it's WGI, like I heard the things that I needed to hear, and then I'll send it off to someone and they'll just like tear it to shreds. And initially it's like, oh God, but then you hear that feedback and it's like, all right, this is going to make me better next time, because now it's like I've added to my checklist of things to make sure that I think about and make sure that I'm giving everyone the best information that I can.